This show, I have a very special guest all the way from Canada. Chelsey Brown is, to many nurses, the pinnacle of success. Now, because she's always growing, she's got a lot further to go, and she would not describe herself that way. But when I met her at the Inner Circle, I instantly saw something special in what she'd achieved and also where she's going. And that's why I'm really excited to bring her story to you, because if you're a nurse or any clinician who's trying to build something special, she's got a lot to teach us. She's been through the battles, she's got the scars, but she's also got the clinic to prove it, 3 clinics in fact. And what I'm hoping to learn from her is how she managed to do that. Now, as many of you will know, I have 1 clinic. It's quite a big establishment and a training school, but it's really hard going beyond 1. And that's what I'm hoping to learn from her, is how do you manage a team, lead a team, and how did she get where she is today from starting out? So welcome, Chelsey.
Thank you so much for having me.
It's a pleasure. So let's start. I'm really excited to talk to you genuinely because, and ever since we met at Inner Circle, I had so many questions I knew what to ask. In fact, I remember you asking a question. I was thinking, that was such a good question. She seems really poised. And then discovering that you'd built these clinics, I was like, this is actually really unusual. So I'd like to hear a little bit about your origin story and exactly how you managed to get to where you are, but we're going to cover that over a period of time. So tell me a little bit about how you got into medical aesthetics.
The story is really long. I never believed that I would get into medical aesthetics. It wasn't really a thing. It's a new field, particularly in Canada and particularly where I lived. And I grew up actually in a small town in Northern Ontario, which is a province of Canada. And I had big dreams early on. I thought I was going to be an actress. I thought I was going to be a doctor. And I always had these big goals that I always seemed to find a way to reverse engineer, but I never really had the drive, like exactly what I was going to do with that. And I just sort of opened myself to what made me happy. And I was always in the science world or the beauty world, and they never seemed to align together. I always felt like an imposter in one or the other. And that's probably the most important part of my story, is that I went and got an undergraduate degree in biology. I felt really passionate. I knew this is what I would do for the rest of my life until it wasn't what I would do for the rest of my life. And I kind of meandered back and forth between the science world and the beauty world. And after my degree, I did apply to medical school, and I rescinded my application because that really didn't feel right for me. And so I went back into the beauty world. I owned a makeup business. I worked for the largest retail corporation in Canada that sells makeup and cosmetics. And I just sort of ping-ponged back and forth between those worlds until one day I decided I was going to go into nursing. And I'm extremely observational. Everything that I do, I observe, I absorb, and other people as well. So I listen to their stories, and it helps me navigate. I think that's actually part of how I've gotten to where I am at my age. I'm 36, is learning from other people. So I went into nursing school thinking that I was going to maybe become an obstetrician gynecologist. Maybe I was going to work in labor and delivery. And then when I was actually in the hospital, I thought, this is really not for me, because I'm always thinking so big. And I just knew working in the institution, I would never be able to make a difference. I would just be a little drop in the bucket that would never be able to do what I needed. And I thought that would suffocate who I was as a person. And I decided that if I was going to do nursing, then I had to do something that required a lot of critical thinking. I needed to do something very fast-paced to keep me going, but I didn't really believe I was going to last in the hospital that long. I thought I'm either going to become an administrator or a CEO of a hospital and make big change, but I felt like that would absorb all of my energy, and I would someday in my elder years pass and feel like I didn't amount to anything. It's just like working from the outside in, sort of an activist, you try so hard and you might only make small differences. And I stumbled upon actually my current relationship, and I moved to the bigger city. I knew I'd reached my horizon and the small city that I lived, and I had this 5-year plan. I'm going to move to the capital. I'm going to work in policy. I'm going to do something with that. Politics really captivated my attention until it didn't captivate my attention. Once you learn enough about something, you realize it's maybe for you or not for you. And I pushed through. I was in university, and I took the last 2 years, and I really just lobbied administration at my university and said, I'm moving, and I would really like you to support me to move to this other city. And I know it's unorthodox, but they said, well, it's not normal, but with your grades, if you can maintain your grades, then we will somehow find a way to support you. And so I did distance learning in my last 2 years, and I did my preceptorship, and I really pushed through. I didn't allow them to say no to me. I provided them a package and just said, this paperwork's done, take it or leave it, what are you going to do? And I think that the administration was really captivated by that, and they thought, okay, we're going to support this girl to do what she needs to do. So I ended up moving in my nursing degree to the capital of Canada, and I ended up in an emergency room, and I loved it. The fast pace, that was great. But while I was there, it was an opportunity because there was a smaller hospital. I could sort of move around and meander between different factions. They had an operating room, and they had the emergency room. And the operating room and the emergency room were very close together. So one day there was this nurse walking by, and my preceptor nudged me, and she said, that's the head trauma nurse, like Ottawa, like everyone knows who she is. She's really good at what she does. And I said, perfect. See you later. I'm going to go meet her and introduce myself. And she happened to work for a plastic surgery clinic. And she was working with the surgeon that they work at this private facility that day. And I just said, is there any chance I could come in just to shadow, just to watch? I haven't been in the operating room before. And so here I was in my last year of nursing, getting emergency room experience and operating room experience, which is really unheard of for especially a nursing student. And by the end of the day in that shift, so the plastic surgeon was doing hand procedures, which is very common. I don't know if it's like that here, but plastic surgeons in Canada, they have some type of other surgery that they do that complements their plastic or cosmetic practice. And so he just talked to me throughout the day, and I think there were a lot of moments during the day where he asked me questions, and you realize I have this scientific background, so this biology background, I understood anatomy, and I came through on all of the questions that he was asking, and I think it impressed him, and he invited me to come back to his private facility and said, why don't you come and complete your studies with us? So I had to go back to my university with another package and say, you gave me this opportunity, but I'm switching it, and I'm going to go do this other thing. And they were like, and I'm like, but the paperwork's already done, and this is it. And so they accepted it, and they're like, okay. So I'm the only person that I know of that did a double preceptorship. So your last year, you're in there working full time. So between the emergency room and the operating room. And I really enjoyed this relationship that I began with this surgeon, and he became a mentor of mine. And in his facility, he had injectables, which was very new in Canada, very new in our city. And I had just started receiving my own neuromodulator treatments. So it was obviously, I realized this stuff felt like witchcraft. How do I get more of it? I realize I'm in the field, and I'm well positioned to maybe start thinking about this. I've got this background in biology, and I've got this background in entrepreneurship, or I should say retail. I worked for these retail giants, and I just had a lot to bring to the table. And he said, well, you know what? If you're interested in this, go downstairs and spend some time with our nurses that do this. And I did. And I think he probably regrets it because he totally lost me in the operating room. They offered me a position, and I said, you know what? I think I'm going to go into this as a business. And he said, all right, well, if you're going to do it, don't do it part-time, jump in 2 feet. And I just listened to it, and I asked advice, and he totally was my very first mentor. And we'll probably have to edit this part out, but my business has so surpassed his business, and he's asked me a few times to kind of come back and work for him. I remember one year on Christmas Eve, he called me to say Merry Christmas, and any chance you could come on board with me? I know it's been a couple of years, can't blame a guy for trying. And I had this team already. I think we were 7 at that time. And I said, I can't abandon my team. I'm really loving what I'm doing. And while I was there, like I said, I was observational. It's really unorthodox to have a private facility. At that time, there were not many. I knew there was one in Toronto, one in Ottawa, and now it's more of a regular thing. But to have an operating room outside of the institution, the standards are higher. You have to meet higher expectations. And there were these books on top of the fridge or somewhere, just big, thick books. And I asked permission to take them home. And everyone looked at me with, like I had 3 eyes. What are you doing with this? And it was basically the policies and procedures, the SOPs, to build a private practice. I went home and I studied them, and I gave them back, and everyone thought I was crazy for reading this really annoying. It was annoying to them because they had to go through these leaps and hurdles to get this building up and running. But I learned so much from that, from reading those standard operating procedures. I learned a lot about the hurdles that they had gone through. And I just found in this moment that I was able to take every great thing that I had ever done, and all of the failures and all of the the wins and put it into this idea that I'm going to do this as a business. And I didn't even really know where I was going with it exactly, but I knew with a fire inside, it's just intuition that I'm going to do it. But whatever I'm going to do, I'm going to do it really well. And that's sort of the history of how I got there. I just stayed open. I asked a lot of questions. I took a lot of opportunities. I networked. That's a big part of my growth is learning from people and meeting people. And just saying yes to everything that felt right. And before you know it, here I am. I went and got a loan, I think for $35,000. I stayed really lean. I opened this clinic right before the pandemic, and sort of the rest is history. We've been really successful through my observations. I've been able to avoid big mistakes, made some mistakes to learn from, but that's sort of my story is just which doors and windows do you want to open for yourself that give you the next opportunity. And I really think that's what life is. It's a story. It's a chapter book of what you decided to do and what you didn't decide to do, and each one of those decisions is pivotal. So it was just a journey. It was a meander. It was not a straight linear ladder, but it was just finding myself through all of that. I'm not done. There's still so much to do, but that's sort of my story.
So that's really exciting to me for a number of reasons. The first thing is, as you said, it's not linear. You did a series of transformations, and I've always been really interested in transformation. I've obviously done it myself, but I don't know. It always actually feels quite hard to me. And we're as we'll get onto later, I'm in the stage of another transformation now. And the thing that I find hardest about it is letting go. It's not actually the idea itself. Like the new opportunity is actually quite clear to me, but it's how do you make the transition? Because you're usually in every single stage of your path, you had something valuable already. You already had a job that you liked. You already had a good career, in all of those, yet you were able to identify there was something better and basically be quite incredibly decisive and sever one thing to move on to the next. And when I talk to clinicians around the world, that's the hardest bit. It's not knowing what you want to do, it's letting go of what you've currently got. So what is it about you, or why are you so happy to let go of the old stuff if you need to?
I think intellectual reflection. Like I said, you just actually said something really important, that letting go of something. I thought that was letting go of information you knew, but you just made me realize that I actually let go of identities. I thought I was going to be a doctor. There are influential people along the way as well. I remember my biochemistry professor. He said to me, he's like, why do you want to be a doctor? I couldn't answer. It was the prestige. And then after I applied and I had done it all, I did it. All I needed to do was become accepted. I let go of that very quickly. I'm sorry, you have to repeat the question. I just got on 3 trains of thought.
Yeah, there. I mean, so the identity thing is also, I think it's one of the hidden barriers to success, is that you forge an identity around something that is not compatible with your future success. So, if you become, for me, it would be the good NHS doctor who only serves the health of his patients, which I think we still do in aesthetics, but it's different. It can be hard to transition out of that. And in fact, I remember this very clearly, which was, what am I now? Like, I'm a cosmetic doctor. Does that mean I have to buy a different watch and wear different clothes and whatever in order to be, and it felt jarring. And, I can imagine many people not making the move because they have a different story about what that is. But the thing that allowed me to do it is some other deeper identity that's more fluid. I wouldn't say fluid. It's more of a, and this is what I'm interested in is what do you think although you've shifted in where you work, there must be a deeper identity that's consistent. I
agree. I remembered instantly what you had asked, and it was how do you let go? But the truth is I didn't, because the core factors are just actually who I am. Those never change. And I give this advice to people all the time. You have to really reflect on your deepest values. They actually don't have anything to do with what I do. But as long as I remain consistent, I remain happy and I remain healthy. And those are to be a really good person, to continuously learn, and to grow. And I've never stopped doing that. But the identity of the other things, wanting to be a doctor, wanting to be an actress, all these things, obviously I have confidence. So that's a big part of how I'm able to know what I do and don't want to do. In a split second, I said, I don't want to be a doctor anymore. And I was able to let that go. It wasn't my true identity. And I have had moments where I've sort of fallen away from those values and I felt sick. And I remember feeling like I don't feel like myself. There's something wrong here. So I got really serious about never falling away from those values. They've translated into my business. We don't do business with people that I think are not nice, that don't want to grow, that have barriers like that, or treat people wrong, poorly. So I think I've never fallen away from those core values of who I am. I think that's probably been the biggest part. I know where I want to go, and I really dive into that intuition, and when it feels right, I go with it. But I'm never ever falling away from those true values.
Mm-hmm. So what do you think is number one for you? What's your most important value? Because they're all important, but there'd be one that if you weren't living with, you'd notice the soonest.
If I die today, I would want people to remember me as warm. So if in a moment, in a room full of people, if someone is being picked on or is the underdog, I'm attracted to that, and I have been since I was a toddler. I have so many stories about that. I want people to remember me as warm. I think that's the biggest thing. I know it has really nothing to do with what we do on a daily basis, but that's the number one for me. I want people to know that their emotions and their heart are safe with me. And if I fall away from that, I can't be Chelsey Brown.
Interesting. I thought you were going to say growth. So that's interesting that there's a deeper...
Mm-hmm. But I don't think I can grow unless I stick to that, who I am that way. Yeah. So growth is could be such a broad definition, and you grow every day based on that first thing.
Yeah, so it reminds me a little bit of when I did one of these Tony Robbins conferences, and they basically try and boil you down to a frequency, which is a really fun way of thinking about yourself. And they actually say make the noise of your soul at one point, and it's a super emotional experience. But it's and I know some people find it a bit woo-woo, but people do have a frequency. I do feel like when you meet someone, you get their vibe quite quickly. In fact, when we talk about staff, it's quite interesting. When you hire people, I always ask the receptionist what they thought of the person in the 5 minutes they were in the reception room, and they get it right. I'd say 98% of the time they're right. And they're with them for 5 minutes, they hardly say anything. We'll spend 2 hours interviewing them. On the way out, I'll form a conclusion, I'll say, what do you think? And the receptionist would get the same vibe. So it's really interesting to think of yourself that way, and what I love about this is then you have a much higher level definition of yourself that can float between different specialties and different jobs and opportunities, and you're still carrying your message, your core message, through all of those things, which is really cool. I'd still like to know about, did you have fear in any of these moments, or do you quite quickly switch to feeling certain about the next thing, or how long do you have? Because I think I've found myself at various points thinking about doing something for sometimes years, which is the right thing to do, but I just haven't found a way to do it. Or are you much more decisive in making those switches? I am,
because I'm obsessive about thinking about those things. So if something, we'll talk about this when we talk about the longevity stuff, but when something makes sense to you, I can't let it go out of my mind, and it grows and it creates life. And I do believe I'm very decisive. I know when something feels right or wrong.
How do you feel about, because one of my experiences of that was when I pulled out of day-to-day clinical practice, I found it really hard letting go of my patients, because so many of them I'd known for 12, 15 years, and I didn't want to be doing 5 days a week in the clinic. And they would message me. Some of them have still held on for 4 years trying to get in to see me. And I just can't see them all. So I can see a very small number of people and do the other things. But I found that transition quite hard. And in fact, COVID forced me to do it. So I was forced. Tell us about a time, have you ever had to say goodbye to someone or a team or something like that? And how did you find that?
Say goodbye. I'm okay with seasons of life. I do believe, because this is the way that I work. I think about this idea and obsess about it, and it's always grandiose. But I have to reverse engineer. You cannot get from step 1 to 20 without going through steps 2 to 19. And so I get on this track, but I'm not okay. I'm okay with letting go. Now, however, there are some people from my past that have been so strongly connected to me that they have followed me through all of my different businesses and realms. There's a handful of them. I'm okay with the seasons. Not everything was meant to be in every season, and people and lifestyles, jobs, they become part of that season, and that's what they were meant to be, part of the season. And when the season ends, they're meant to stay in that season. They're not everything is meant to come with you where you're meant to go. I don't know if it's healthy or not, but I do have a very strong belief in myself as well. Like I really do. Maybe it's self-serving at the deepest level. It could be very self-serving that I don't feel the need, but at the same time, those core values have always come through. So I've never had to give up those things.
Mm-hmm. Where do you think your self-belief comes from?
I think it's genetic. I think it's personality based, because if you knew my beginnings, they're incredibly humble. And I grew up on a farm with sharing everything with 5 other siblings. We lived under the poverty line every single year. I don't know how my parents did it. My mother made me feel like I could do anything. I think a lot of that comes from her. I'll give her credit for that every single day. So there's an interesting juxtaposition of both my parents' personalities. And there's this really cute story that my mom always tells. And it sounds really pompous, but I was going to kindergarten, and I don't obviously remember this, but my mom said to me, you know, Chelsey, you're going to meet a lot of other girls, and there might be someone there just as pretty as you. And I went, there will be? And that is a pompous moment. But she realized that for the 4 years before I started school, that she had delivered in me this idea of myself that I was amazing and I was great, and it was okay that if I thought that I was pretty, or that my dress was the prettiest. It was really the furthest from the truth. Like, we'd go to school, you're missing teeth, and I wore the same dress probably 3 times a week, but she really instilled in me that I could do anything. And she's been a game changer for me at every step of the way. I got pregnant when I wanted to go to university, and I thought, this is over. And she changed that for me. She said, why do you think your life is over? Because you got pregnant. How are you going to not achieve the same things because of this? And she just always instilled that in me. So there's that self-belief. Probably it comes from that. I'll give her credit every single day, which is strange because I don't think she has the same self-belief in herself, but somehow she translated it to me, and I accepted it. And then there's my father, who is the hardest working individual that I have ever met in my entire life, even though, it doesn't amount to a lot of money at the end of the year. And I think those two things together, really hard work, if you put in the hard work and you have strong belief in yourself, there's literally nothing that you can't do in this world. Mm-hmm. Yeah, self-belief comes from those early years.
That's really interesting, and it fits with something I hope to be true, which is that if you love your children enough in a way that builds self-esteem, they're driven more by creativity than fear. Yeah.
You said that fear. I think fear drives most people. We are developed in a world of fear. Now, I lived on an island. I had 700 acres of farmland to explore. I was really buffered by the rest of the world. I didn't have a lot to fear. I also didn't, we didn't travel. So I really did live this isolated life, sort of. We lived 20 minutes outside the city, and we did not really go anywhere. My parents, we might have went into the US a couple times driving, but we really didn't go anywhere. And now that looking back, we grow up in this world where fear drives everything that we do, and all of our limitations. We go to school, and we believe we are forced to think what are you going to be when you grow up? Right? And it's a list of things, but we are fearful to go beyond that because we're created, we're developed, we grow in a world that puts fear and limitations on us. And I think it's a way to minimize chaos in the world, because we have 10 billion people in this world. If everybody maybe did what I did or had that much self-belief, we might be in a really interesting predicament. But I think fear does drive most people. And I think that's how I've been able to get ahead. And anybody who's successful, it's either that or some blockage of, I want to be known as warm. But like you said, with the receptionist, anybody that comes in for an interview, you usually get the same vibe from those people. You can't hide who you are. It's very difficult to hide from who you are. And unless you're maybe psychopathic, unless you're totally missing those checkpoints in your brain.
I think so someone asked me on Instagram recently how I got over the fear of all the various things you go on, and I actually reflected on that quite a long time before I replied. And it was actually not that I wasn't fearful, but I was more afraid of not reaching my potential than I was of failing along the way.
Fair enough.
But but the other thing I think is worth hearing about your story is I think because you had a mother in particular, and your father represented a work ethic, but it sounds like your mother loved you in a way that built a sense of self-esteem. So you weren't working to earn love, you're working for an output. So, and this is something that I'm kind of was in between with, because a lot of wanting to be a doctor for me was around like wanting to light people up, which if you think about it is actually kind of wanting them to like you as a person. And that works very well, but there are points where it doesn't work at all, and then you have to build a different mode. And I've always had this both, like I know I want to create something, but at the same time, if you work to try and please people and to try and get the approval of everyone you meet, you cannot grow, because growth is threatening.
That's right.
So some people like it, but a lot of people don't like it, and I've experienced that in my own family. It's not always applauded. That you're this business person, an entrepreneur and all those kind of things, and which has connotations depending on the political spectrum that you're part of. But to know that you are enough in yourself so that you can then create, knowing that a percentage of people will not be happy with the creation and a percentage will be thrilled because you'll actually be solving a problem. You need to, that's the heart of real confidence, which is you're not doing it so that other people will love you. Right. You already love yourself. I think it's key. And it might be for a lot of people the first thing to realize, which is, are you working and it's completely changeable once you're aware of it. If you're not working to create something that you yourself think will be valuable, but you're working so that someone else will pat you on the back, you're probably going to grind to a halt at various points, because they do not care until it's already there. Like, it's something I've noticed, particularly what I told you off air about my dad, is like, he doesn't really understand what I'm doing. So for him, it's just confusing. Yeah. I never get like, well done, but I don't need it anymore. I've grown out of that phase. But it sounds like you grew out of that phase like quite soon. So you started to grow, do the things that you thought were valuable in their own right without anyone else saying that's a good thing. Would that be fair to say?
Yeah. Yeah, I was never competing for love. You're right. I had that foundation, those Maslow's hierarchy of needs. I had that to be able to, the proper foundation to step off from. I guess I do have a fear of not finishing my goals. So my goals might change, the path changes, but I do have that fear of not completing what I set out to do. So there is still some fear in there.
Tell us, what is that fear? What does that feel like?
When I started to make a big goal, I'm going to do it. So I work every day doing several, daily I accomplish something to get towards that goal. And I don't want to seem like a failure, but I do know that it's important, but I do have the confidence to back it up. I definitely know that. And when I dig deeper into that, the more confidence I have and I go off on my own and do my own thing, the more I realize that actually there is a larger following out there that wants to do what you want to do when you're that confident. So you're never really missing a following. There's always people there to support you. It's just they haven't found you yet. I don't know if that makes any sense, but it's that if you don't care, if you've got a goal, and if you don't really care if other people, I guess I'm just reflecting exactly what you said. I'm listening to you, and I'm actually learning about myself through your stories. But I guess, yeah, that's the fear, is not completing the goal for myself. And then once you do that and you have that much confidence in yourself, people find you. And that's part of my success as well, is that people they're drawn to that confidence. They're drawn to this person's doing something differently, and I want a part of it.
Mm-hmm. I can echo that. As soon as you came up with this idea of coming here, your confidence around this issue it is absolutely magnetic. You're like, I don't know what's going to happen, but I want to stick around to see. Yep. And see if I can be part of it. So I absolutely agree with that.
And we could have done this virtually, right? But it's actually about making the steps to attain your goal with the most effort that you possibly can. I have a lot of conviction. That's the right word. I might have fear, but I have more conviction than the fear.
Yeah. So that self-trust it's super interesting to me, because it's one of the questions I get asked the most by injectors is, how do you become confident? Mm-hmm. Now, some of it will come from having, and I think because there are plenty of people with awful parents who are extremely successful. So sure. If you're listening to this and you think, oh, my parents weren't quite what I need, now I'll never be successful, that's definitely not the case. Mm-hmm. And in fact, I would say that my parents were not like your parents. My mom had a lot of passion for me. She was a very passionate person, but she would also like cut me down unbelievably for things along the way. You know, she had a fiery temper, and you know, in the 80s when it was all right to hit people, but it wasn't actually the whacks with the belt that I remember. It was more the things she'd say.
It's a disappointment.
Yeah, and it was and I was scatty, kind of slightly ADD, like, underperformed all the way through school until I was about 17, and so I was constantly in conflict. But she was always on my side, but she would also undermine, but with things she'd say. I think she was trying to get a response, so she'd say something that would be bad for my confidence. So I only want to share that because I want people who haven't had you know, a background to think, well, you can actually earn your own confidence. And let's talk a little bit around, because there's one thing being a loved person who feels like you're worthy of love anyway, but there's another thing actually stepping out and saying, I'm going to start a business that no one, I don't know if you've had anyone else in your family who started a business, but I'm going to do this thing that no one's done. You've got a different type of confidence because there's a confidence in your own capability. Mm-hmm. How did you get the confidence in your capabilities? Through
some of the wins and through reflecting what other people say about me. I really do absorb those things. And I want to second that I don't want people to be disillusioned that you require a supportive family to be successful. I don't think that's the case at all. I think you can take whatever start and foundation you had and turn it into something. And actually, some of the most successful people in the world that I have met, they actually took the worst things that happened to them and turned it into the best things that happened to them. So I just want to say that I think the start is different for everybody, but the climb to the top of the mountain, that could be based on that belief in yourself. Where that comes from, it's really self-driven. It's really, really about me. It's probably FOMO. I did this volunteering thing when I was in my 20s, when I was going to go to medical school, and I thought, I had to make my CV look the best, I had to make it look better than everybody else's, so I did a lot of volunteering work, and I worked with these elders in the hospital. And the minimum age was 75. And they all had most of them had cognitive disease of some sort. And I learned so much from those people. But I was able to absorb some of their stories and their successes. And I began to become afraid of being an elderly person and not having achieved what I needed to achieve in my life. I have FOMO of 90-year-old Chelsey being disappointed in 36-year-old Chelsey that I didn't take the actions that I needed to take. I have this really weird, retrospective, old soul view of myself that I have a hard time explaining, but I really do. That FOMO drives me. I don't have regrets. I have none, but I don't want to have any regrets. I want to fulfill everything that makes sense to me. And again, it goes back to those core values, but I have a FOMO of not doing not driving my own path, not accomplishing the things that I want to. I have a FOMO of my older self looking back at me. And it drives a lot. And then I have checkpoints in between where I realize that I have that belief in myself because people ask me the same questions. How do I think like you? How do I do the things that you do? I do believe it's personality based, as well as the platform that I started with. I never had to fight for love or worry about that. I could just dream. But then at some point, I went beyond that because my parents are still on that farm and they haven't gone beyond that, but that wasn't for me. Somewhere along the line, I knew my stars were different. And I have had people say to me, I had this really unique experience with one of our receptionists. We were actually driving to one of our locations and she was getting a ride with me. And she learned my age and she realized that I was actually younger than her. And she said, not that I thought you looked older than me, but you've just accomplished so much that I really assumed you were like well into your 40s. And I had moments like that really took me back and realized, okay, I'm doing something. I actually have a massive amount of belief in myself to just go and just do. So yeah, a FOMO of my elder self.
So this sounds like something I believe to be true, which I've been thinking about quite a lot, which is fear is normal, but you have to be afraid of the right things. Mm-hmm. Too many people are afraid, as we touched on earlier, they're afraid of losing love from someone instead of afraid of living to their potential. So and what you kind of said there, if you don't mind me saying, is you didn't start, it's not that the confidence that made you do it, it was the fear of not living up to your potential that then made you do things that then built your confidence.
Yeah.
And I think that's really important for people to hear, because if you're waiting to feel confident, that doesn't arrive. In fact, the longer you wait, the less confident you get.
That's right.
You have to, and it's interesting to hear you speak, because I think maybe this is why we're both interested in longevity. I still have my 3 a.m. waking up, and it's exactly what you said. It's some future me looking back thinking, why didn't you do more of that? And I've never escaped it, but it's one of my driving fears is like, am I actually optimizing for the right things? Am I making the most of my children? Am I making the most of the opportunities? And it's those 3 a.m. when I can't sleep and my sleep score is dropping that I'm thinking, you better make a move on that. Otherwise, you're going to regret it later. Yeah. But simultaneously, I have no regrets.
Yeah.
So I don't know.
It's a kind of an unexplainable thing, but I like the idea of that frequency. I feel like I found my frequency. Mm-hmm. And, like I have some background in physics and in biology, and I do really believe that, there's energy is never goes anywhere. Mm-hmm. It's never created. It's like matter, right? It changes, but it doesn't go anywhere. And I think I found my frequency. And the closer I stay to that frequency, the better I feel and the more belief I have in myself. Because if I just stay, that's the recipe. If you stay close to your frequency, you stay close to your values, you can achieve anything. You really can. And the goal will be different from person to person. I don't want everybody to strive for what I strive for. But I think that's a big part of it.
Yeah.
And
absolutely. Anyone hearing this wondering about the worst thing you can do is copy someone else's goal in the hopes that you will feel how you imagine them to feel, which is never the case anyway. But goals are very personal things, and the more intricate it is to your personality, the more likely that you'll actually do it. And I think a lot of people
be successful at it.
Yeah, it's okay. I think we all start. I mean, I certainly started out copying other people's goals, thinking, well, that's what you're supposed to do. But as you reflect and you learn, you should hone that down to something very specific. That there's a great quote. I think it's from Alex Hormozy. He says, if you think your industry is too competitive, maybe you should change your goals. And a lot of people say our industry is competitive, but a good challenge to that is, well, why don't you make your business more specific? Mm-hmm. Because then you'll have fewer competitors, and that should be as specific as the individual that you are. And it's a thing worth spending a great deal of time thinking about. The business I have now is totally different to what I thought I'd be doing, but I built it around some very personal goals. Like, I didn't want to be one of these doctors who was always on a plane flying to different conferences. Mm-hmm. I didn't want to travel even to work for an hour. I wanted to do something close to my family. I want to raise my 2 boys, and then after that, maybe I'll do those other things. And so I had to give up a lot of opportunities because I could feel myself being pulled in that direction. And I had to say no to all of it and do something like quite different. But it's exactly what I wanted at this phase. And now I'm moving, as we'll talk on, into something else that we'll build on in the future. But they come from being specific, and that sounds like the other thing I see in you, which I realized with Miranda, I had talking to Miranda about why we seem to have done quite well, and it is that ability to pay attention and shift step when you need to. I actually think you're better than it than me. I think you've done more of them, and you've done it much more decisively. But we were able to pay attention and move on to the next thing, instead of a lot of people get stuck in a groove and they hammer away. In fact, it's actually kind of the definition of poor mental health. If you think about a depressed person. And I've been depressed, I know what it's like. Essentially, you build a prison that's of your own imagination. Like, you have a series of beliefs that make it impossible to move forward. And I think a lot of people get stuck in a circuit. Yeah, and to break out of those things, you have to have a type of thought patterns that allow you to imagine something better and to move into that. So you're almost. I play a lot of chess with my kids, and it's almost like the knight. Yes. You can just jump over things.
My life is a chessboard. Yeah. It's the decisions you decide not to do are almost more important than the decisions you do decide to do, the decisions you make. And I agree with you. I'm very decisive about what I want to do and what I don't want to do. I knew very quickly I was going to strive for medical school, but then very quickly I wanted nothing to do with it, because I think I clued into the fact that it was a prestige, but then it was also a life. I felt like it might be a life of imprisonment. I'm stuck to this clinic and I actually can't grow beyond that. But I hear you on I actually know exactly what I don't want. I do not want to go to regular conferences. I do not like them. I'm sorry for everybody out there planning all these $1 million conferences, and they're everywhere all the time. There's some that I do want to go to, and it has usually just more to do with the networking part of it. But I give up on that. Actually, after Inner Circle, I was like, that's it. I think I'm not going to conferences anymore. I'm going to do my own thing. I'm on my own path, and with the most conviction I can possibly muster up, I'm going to do my own thing. And I do these micro networkings. That is more valuable to me than going and listening to injectable techniques that, you know, maybe haven't really changed a whole lot in the last 5 years. And I really believe that strongly. I know what I don't want to be a part of, sort of, and so extracting what you get out of it.
Yeah, I think that'll be useful to some people. What I see with those, because I'm exactly the same as you. I went to them. I didn't get a nice vibe from a lot of them. Like, you don't really feel like these people are that happy. Like, I'm not saying obviously it's everyone, but that, you know, you just pick up a kind of general vibe of this is a zero-sum competitive game around here. And obviously Inner Circle's wildly different, but it's I made that decision, and there's always a FOMO because every time they happen, everyone's got all their pictures on social media and like, I should be there, and like, you actually like lots of people and I'd like to hang around them, so the networking would be the only draw for me as well. But then it takes so much time and effort that you've actually not put into your business, and this is what I think a lot of people do, and this is what you've got that's different, because you're trying to build something that, and it's your own personal goal. You're not trying to make friends at scale, you know. It makes sense to cut all that stuff off and go and I often say, go and focus on your patients, like because they'll tell you what you need to do. You don't have to copy your colleague.
Get that inspiration from your patients. It's endless. I don't get the same inspiration at conferences that I do from my own patients. I'm sick of the hamster wheel. You go to these things and it's a lot about status, and I don't like being distracted by that. I like to actually cut out distraction. I told this to Felix when I did the podcast with him as well, that at one point I actually unfollowed every single other injector because I caught myself being distracted, and it was taking up even small amounts, even for a small amount of time, real estate in my brain that made me think I was doing something that I shouldn't be doing. And it was tripping me, so I just got rid of it. Now I've changed that, and I have a lot of people that I respect in this field of aesthetics that I do love following, but I've learned that the hamster wheel, doing things the same thing over and over and over again for this celebrity status, I think it happens a lot in North America. I think it's worse in North America, to be honest, that it brings people together, and it's just, I don't know, I call it the hamster wheel, doing the same thing over and over and over again without revolution or reinvention. And I think we have so much knowledge and technology today that we can do something totally different and make real impact. I think it's the same reason why I avoided the hospital. The hamster wheel of, you know, administration makes the decisions. They have no idea sometimes what's going on at the actual floor level. No change is really made. They're caught in the hamster wheel of how it's always been done. History continues to repeat itself over and over and over again. And I feel smarter than that. I feel like I'm more than that. But it took a lot of soul searching to know that, okay, what everybody else is doing is not what I want to do. Some people might think I'm crazy, but I have my own path and I have my own vision, and that has been a huge part of my journey, is that decisiveness. It can go off at any moment, and when I do that, I know for sure. It's like, just follow this, just lean into it. And there's a book that I read that I'm actually going to share because it changed a lot for me. This was before I owned a business. It's called Lean In by Sheryl Sandberg, and she is one of the sort of titans of, I think, Google and Facebook, and she was really, there's other names that are really you think of when you think of those companies. There's other male names, but she was really a big part of it. And the whole book was just about leaning in, and I realized that that's my recipe. Lean in to the table, whatever that is. And for me at that time, that meant I was really, I found myself at a lot of tables where there was a lot of men speaking, very powerful men. And I was a volunteer at the hospital at that time. And I really didn't have, what did I have to offer? But somehow they asked me to be here. When I leaned in onto the table and I actually spoke, I realized I had something so valuable to offer. And they started inviting me back. And then before you know it, I was on the strategic planning committee. And I had something really valuable to say. And why? Because I leaned into that. And I thought of myself as value, but I was doing something very different than what everybody else was doing, which was not speaking or not going to those meetings, not going to those tables. But I think that's a really great book for anybody who is just sort of starting out and looking for a little bit of self-confidence. Read Lean In. It's a great, easy read, but it was an affirmation for me. I'd already been doing it, but it was an affirmation that you can continue to do it your way.
Yep. So doing it your way, that is, I think if you're going to take one thing away, I actually recently spoke exactly about this on a little short reel, because I realized so many people are looking around trying to figure out what to do. And it's better to look inside and figure out what to do.
That's right.
Because when you look around, you end up copying a lot of other people who are also copying a lot of other people. So I don't mean copying like they don't come up with anything too different,
right.
because there's safety in doing the same thing everyone else is. But there's also mediocrity. Like you cannot copy the fifth. I used to give this terrible advice with setting prices, which is just copy the average of your town. So the worst, I regret so many people heard that from me when I first started out, and it's a terrible way.
No, but emulation is a sign of a novice. But you grow from that. So I think you actually do need to emulate something at the beginning. I think it's the starting point.
That's fair. So it gets you moving. In fact, that's how you can learn a lot from watching kids and how they learn. And my little boy Jasper, when he was 2, he used to. I remember because my mom had Parkinson's, and she would walk in this way, and he would hold her hand and emulate the way she walked. It was so cute. Also tragic, but but it was. But there is that stage where you emulate, but. Which is a very kind thing to say at this point, because I have just been down on it. But you can do it. You do it to get moving, but eventually you got to express yourself. Yeah.
Unless that's fair for you, like unless that you are happy with where you're at. But I do, emulation, but it's not sustainable. The more you copy other people, it's like the idea of people will figure out your personality if you're fronting too much. Like you spend an hour being somebody else, but it's not sustainable. People figure out who you are, and the way you walk and the way you present yourself eventually will come through. And I think it's the same thing if you're constantly copying other people. You do need it to start, but if you're constantly doing that, then that authenticity is not there, and I don't think you'll be as successful in the long run. But it's important to emulate.
Well, it's exhausting because you're not actually being yourself.
That's right.
I think it's Jim Carrey said something along the lines of, "You're not depressed, you're just exhausted from playing the character you think you need to be."
Yeah. He's brilliant.
And then the other strange quote, which is related, they're probably the only thing Karl Marx ever said that I agree with, is that essentially your workers, his idea was the workers need to see themselves in the produce. Like you need to see yourself reflected in your business, is a different way of saying it. So if you're constantly copying other people's business, you actually don't see yourself in it. And I remember this happening with Skin Viva. There was a period where it shifted from being a more cardboard cutout thing into what felt like actually something that was mine. I remember just flicking through the Instagram and the Facebook and be like, hey, this feels like a real, or not just another skin clinic. And that was when I'd stopped trying to emulate and just started to express more. And that's, I think it's a stage of development. There's a stage where you stand on your own 2 feet and then you say, no, this is who I am. I'm going to do it slightly differently. I'm not even going to do the thing at all that you're talking about. I'm doing my own version of it. And that's when it gets really fun. It's also hard because you will have fewer mentors by definition, because there are fewer people. And that's something I struggled with a huge amount. I would say that I actually have never had a mentor. I've had people I've tried, like maybe you could say Gary Vee was a mentor, but I don't have that many people who've walked that path and are showing me what to do. I have to figure out, which is exciting, but it's also hard.
I agree. I didn't think I had a mentor either until I looked back. When I talked about this plastic surgeon that I worked with, I realized later actually that he was a mentor to me. And I consider Felix a mentor too. I look at him, like we've got a very similar business sort of acumen. I do want to say, though, that something that I'm really passionate about is the standardization of safety. And I think there's a few key things that you must keep in check, and then you can be creative beyond that. And so creativity does not mean go way off and start, and then you start having all of these medical complications. I think that there's a lot of things that require standardization. I'm really passionate about that, and that comes from that warmth of me. I think I want people to feel really safe, and so there's a big part of your business that does need to be standardized, but there's a lot of room for creativity, and you have to be okay with doing it on your own. I remember so many times people sending me images on Instagram. Do you realize that this clinic looks exactly like yours? Look at their logo, look at their tagline, look at their lounge, look at the reception. Everything is perfectly copied, even in the same city. And it's sort of flattery in the moment. It's somewhat annoying, but they lack authenticity. And then I rebrand and everything looks different, and then they got to change it all over again if that's what they're doing, is to actually copy me. It's not a sustainable recipe. You have to be authentic in some form, and it takes reflection. Anybody can do it, but it takes working on that confidence and really observing observing and putting that into action.
Humans are really astute at picking up fakery. Like, I think it's built into us. In fact, it's almost a default to look for it all the time.
Yep.
So if you follow someone and they say something that contradicts something that they said before, it's really unsettling.
Yes.
And there's a lot of that I think humans, although they may be copying your clinic because it's not self-expression, that it's easily detectable. You see it with content in particular, that if sometimes I see, and I actually don't particularly feel sad anymore. I used to think maybe, I'm being copied, that's sad. But you can't really copy someone, because the same words said in a different tone of voice, in a different way that you can tell is a formula. It just doesn't resonate in the same way. So authenticity is like, it's the bedrock of trust, and that's why you can't actually copy a business. In fact, people from the outside don't even know what the business is. If you copy the price list and the treatment areas and the logo, you're just seeing the tip of the iceberg. That's not what the business is.
I agree. We are pre-programmed to determine if somebody is authentic. It's actually part of our evolution that if we detect something odd about somebody, this goes back to cavemen, if something is off, it's a signal to us. We still have those genes in us to determine if somebody is authentic, or because at some point, it could be because they're scary, right? Like they could be doing something wrong. They could be approaching in a way that is detrimental to our health or our well-being. So we're pre-programmed. We've just gotten away from knowing that that's what that is, but we really can detect very quickly if somebody is authentic. And I love people who, everybody says this person is like, they have no emotion. They seem like constantly irritated, and they're kind of a nasty person, and they don't ever smile. And I love winning those people over, because all it takes is your authenticity. The second that you get through to them, you actually realize that those people are some of the nicest people in the world, some of the smartest people in the world. But it puts you off because just by looking at them, they seem unapproachable. And my son had an interview the other day. He's 15 years old, and he went and applied for his first job, and he got his first interview. And he said, my friend that works there just said, like, don't worry about the hiring guy. He is really straight-faced. He doesn't know how to take a joke, and he's really intimidating. And I said, then just be yourself, because usually those people are looking for a moment to say that this person can't hack it. And so he was just himself, and he's like, that person was great. That person was awesome. I really like that. But we are pre-programmed to determine if somebody is authentic or not. We just don't really know that we're doing it.
It's interesting that your default belief is that behind that austere person is someone who is fine. Like you're not afraid of digging deeper, because it's one of the things I think is essential. A good clinician, you cannot do a good consultation if you think underneath it all is a flawed and dangerous person. You have to have a default positive bias to be a good clinician, even though some people are psychopaths and narcissists, all those things. But if you go into it thinking they'll be fine if I go digging, you actually find the goodness in more people.
They've probably been really jaded, and they've probably been hurt a lot, and so they don't believe most people are authentic. So when they find that in somebody, then you've won them over, actually, in a much more powerful way than somebody who isn't really deeply looking for authenticity. I wasn't always that way, though. I used to believe that this person's really off-putting, and actually some really key figures in my life who have been instrumental were that type. And they're like, how do they, like, I could never work with that person. And I'm like, they seem to like you a lot. And I'm like, yeah, because I'm just really authentic. And you get through really quickly if they can trust you. But I had to develop that through observation. I used to be that person, and I think that's where the growth part comes into play. Is that I just want to say that I didn't always have that belief in people. There was probably a more negative undertone, and then now I've just learned that through observation, those people are actually just looking for something different than the vast majority of the rest, who are more easily won over.
Interesting. So let's talk a little bit about how you've grown your clinics, and if you were starting out today, Chelsey, by yourself. What advice would you give yourself to get started? If you were to mentor yourself from 4 or 5 years ago, what do you think is the most important thing?
I think the biggest piece of advice was what I actually did, which was stay lean, because it's very scary to jump into a big debt. This field doesn't really require a lot of money to start up, and the financial burden of starting out with it it jades the future for you, where you're working to make a dollar rather than to make yourself happy. So I would tell my younger self to stay lean and start small and work your way up if that's what you want. That'd probably be the biggest piece of advice that I could give to myself or other people. And that the moments of success, the moments of change, those pivotal moments, they actually show themselves to you. You just have to be open and aware that they're there. And multiplying my clinics is not from actually wanting to grow, they were from necessity. And I've made them successful.
So that's really interesting. So, because a lot of practitioners are tempted to buy what they see as the image of success. In fact, I've often tell the story of when we were first starting out, we worked in someone else's business and this new clinic opened up over the road. And I thought, that's it, I'm dead. No one's ever going to come and see me in this back room when they have this shiny new clinic. And I used to walk past that clinic every single day for about 8-9 months. And then it just suddenly shut down. And I was like, wow,
yes.
They actually spent a fortune and they didn't have a business, and it's all gone now because a business is not actually what you see. It's the network of people who know and trust that business. You can't see what the business is by the logo and the shiny, the front room. But the other thing that's interesting is I heard an experiment done where they gave people their yearly income in one go, and then they did an IQ test, and then they did the same IQ test when they were running out of money towards the end, and they actually scored lower when they were running out of money. And so this is why when you stay lean, it's not necessarily just about the financials. It's about the fact that you're not in a fear mindset, which means you make more abundant decisions, which tend to be better decisions because you're not fighting for a short-term goal of £1 extra to pay the electricity. So it's a really good insight to keep your overheads as low as possible, and then to reinvest according to the income that you get, which is exactly what I did as well.
Yes, exactly. It keeps you in a safe space. Everything I do in a day, I have this phrase that I say multiple times a day: is this going to cost me sleep at night? Mm-hmm. So if it's a move that it will make me not sleep. So this is where the IQ level lowers, because your health is at risk, and I don't make decisions in my business if it's going to cost me sleep at night. I've already got that problem. Like, I've got a lot on my plate. I'm a CEO. I do all these things. But if this big decision is going to cost me sleep, it's a recipe for a downward spiral. And you can look at these big businesses with inspiration and know that you want to go there, but do not devalue the thousands of steps from day one to that point, because nobody ever starts out that way unless they have, they've already made it in some way and they've got a lot of money to blow and they really just authentically want to have this business. But that doesn't happen. That's not common. You do have to work each step. And actually, if there is a way to expedite to get there, it's a recipe for failure. You need to have those moments. You need to have those checkpoints, those lessons every single step of the way. So it's okay to aspire to that, but you must know. And even if you're behind, you're going to look at other people and say, they're so much more successful than me, and I really want to be there. But if you don't take care of each step to get there, you will be one of those businesses that close. And I think the statistic in America, in North America, is that businesses like ours last on an average under 5 years. Well, I'm at the 5-year mark. I couldn't even imagine slowing. I'm really starting to do something with this inertia that I've created. So I now know, they said before, entrepreneurs and reading all these books of success, that you can tell the success of your business in and around after about the 4th year, because of everything that you've done has created this platform. And that I believe that is very true. So if you expedite the process, you're missing those valuable lessons in year 1, 2, 3, 4. Mm-hmm. That's going to give you the sustainability for the future. So don't devalue that. And if that's where you are, whoever's listening to this podcast, if that's where you're at, you need to dig deep to say that these steps are okay. And I am not where these people that I aspire to be are. And that's where you're supposed to be right now. Mm-hmm. Because being where they're at is not going to be the recipe to keep you around. So there's a lot of steps that go in between, but staying lean at the beginning allowed me to sleep at night. And then I opened my clinic, and then the pandemic hit. So I was really lean and I had that saved me. Not having all of those bills, I had a really perfect sort of scenario, which I don't think is going to happen with a lot of people, but we had a lease and I was able to negotiate 8 months of free rent because I was doing this, the renovation inside. And that's the way that, I don't know if it works here like that, but they said, okay, well, it's going to cost quite a bit of money. And I just actually pooled all my resources and I actually got the entire clinic built and all of my new supplies with that $35,000. I stayed so lean and it was just really me at that point anyways. So I wasn't drawing a salary at that time, but that was part of it. That was important. And when we were shut down, I had to pivot really fast. But again, I had this gumption, I had this intuition that everything we do needs to be virtual. When institutions at that time was not mandated, documentation was often written on paper. Our ERs were a lot on paper. Our labor and delivery rooms were all paper charting. And I said, we're in 2020 or 2019, I guess at the time, or 2018, whatever. And we need to do this as a futuristic. I need to think about the success and build the foundation where we're headed, not where we're at. And so I made everything virtual. And so as soon as we were shut down, I was able to do all virtual consultations. Plus I had no lease for 8 months. So I didn't have a lot of overhead to pay. And I'm so thankful. I really fought for that lean scenario at the beginning because I don't think I'd be here today if I hadn't done that. But I did so many consultations through the pandemic. And then I aligned myself with a company that I loved that did online, we were able to sell skincare through them, medical grade skincare. And that paid my bills. So I did so many consults. And then when we reopened, all those consults booked. So I did that with nothing. I just paid the fee for my software and I actually did all those consults from home, even though my clinic was sitting there empty and beautiful. And so that was just, if I didn't do all of those lean steps at the beginning, I would be in a much different position today. So please, anybody listening, do not devalue that those steps are important. Even if you feel small, that's actually where you're supposed to be.
Mm-hmm. Great advice. I think there's something else in this, which is about there's different types of, your brain tricks you into thinking some things are progress, which are not. So Randa and I, we call this risk-free progress is actually seldom actually progress. So, and one of the biggest areas people do this is in training. So they're perpetual training, but not actually bringing that to market. So it's much harder to do a consultation with a patient who may reject what you have to say than it is to just do another bit of training course or go to that seminar again or whatever it is. So to actually implement what you did know and actually go and interface with the people who judge you, which are your patients, in that time, because you could have done all sorts of things that would seem good, like I'm going to do a PhD or something. But actually to go and build your business and have those conversations it must have been quite hard actually just arranging all of that and marketing yourself and trying to get people on Zoom or whatever. And a lot of people shy away from that element and they do all the other stuff. So did you ever, how did you feel about those when you first started offering services as a clinician? Did you feel good enough already, or like what was it like in those early days?
It was a lot of soul searching. I had to really believe that what I had to offer was something. But what I offered then was not what I offer today. I've reinvested in the business and we've grown our services exponentially. Again, staying lean, not just in the financial aspect, but staying lean in your knowledge. That's really important. You cannot offer everything at the beginning. So offer what you know. And it's usually neurotoxin and dermal fillers. So I had to, so I spent a lot of money on training, but I had to get to a level of confidence. But then I realized, again, this comes back to being a very observational person, which has served me, is that I was going to these trainings and realized that there were people who had their business for years, still going to these trainings, just like you said. And I thought, I can't be that. It can't be this. I have to offer what I know and be confident in it now, build something from that and move to the next stage, which is exactly what I did. So now the training is turned for me. The training is now more focusing on business and business acumen versus techniques and so yeah, I think I see that and people don't take the leap. They don't feel confident enough to do it. I think that at some point, if you've taking the actionable steps to be able to offer that confidently, then maybe that it isn't the right business for you. Yeah. I want everybody to have as much infused confidence as me. But if you don't, patients will suffer and they'll call you out and you'll ruin your business on that reputation that you don't know what you're talking about. So stay lean on your services as well. And I saw that at Inner Circle. I actually met people who really hadn't hardly done any injecting. Somehow they had the confidence to go to Inner Circle. That was amazing. But you have to take that leap. But you don't have to offer everything. Offer some services. And if you're not, do you think people continue to go to those trainings not just because they're not confident in themselves, but they actually think that they don't know what they're doing?
I think they're looking for an identity shift. That's actually what I think is going on with a lot of people, is they feel outsiders and they're looking for someone to say, you're good enough to go and crack on. And that's a stage, you know, we all go through that. I remember myself being an outsider. I remember because I applied to medical school and got rejected, and then did an undergrad degree in genetics. And I remember getting into the lift on the first day of that course with these 4 medical students, and I had such a visceral reaction of like, oh, I'm such a failure. I'm such an outsider. They're all in their white coats, and here I am, not one of them. And because I really wanted that badly, I felt awful about that. So I really know what it's like. And then that transition to becoming the thing I wanted to be was great. But then it was also left me the same for reasons we talked about earlier. But it's a lot of people are in that in between stage, and they want to hang around people like you because they want to. I think part of the secret, for example, with Julie Horn, is when you meet her, she is so lovely that you kind of think, oh, maybe I can be a bit like that as well. So there is that story that you want to break this idea that you're a different species and realize that you're actually the same as us, and that gives people the permission. So some people hang out in these conferences to do that, which I don't begrudge them at all. But they should know why they're there and then go home and implement it quickly. You have to do the scary thing, and unfortunately, you know, I'm really interested in the whole psychology of transformation, but there is a moment, no matter how much work you've done, no matter how much preparation, how clear you're on the goal, and all your fears, where you have to do something you've never done before, and there's that you need to just be brave for. Yes. So that's a big part of the transformation that people shy away from. It's like, we call it, another word for it is professional procrastinating, where everything you do looks like it's on the path, but none of it actually takes you forward. You know, I'm doing all the things, but none of it's actually progress, because the thing that you have to do is the scariest thing of all, which is say, action as well. I'm here, I'll treat you, book in. That's terrifying. Whereas making another Canva post or something is a bit less scary. Well, sometimes it's social media that holds people back as well, because they're not actually saying I'm here, book in. But it's usually, there's a good one of these insights. Usually the scariest thing is the path. Like the thing that scares you the most is actually the thing.
Oh, I love that, because I say that all the time. If I get to something and I see and feel the barrier, that's my signal. That's the path. Because if you don't, there's 1,000 other people, you're the 1,001 person, 1,000 other people will stop at that hurdle and they'll turn around. If you're the one that actually takes the action over the barrier or over the hurdle, you'll be the successful one. And if you feel and believe that you're an imposter, you are, because it's all up here. So you have to find a way to let go of that and get in there and do the thing. And when you do it, you realize, okay, I've done it once, it's not so scary. And then you do it again. It's the action. So it's like obsessive compulsive disorder. We obsess about things until we have the compulsion to do it. And then it sort of makes us feel a little bit better. Okay, I just compulsed, and so it gives you a break. And if we just stay in the obsessive zone, it breaks us down and we're not able to overcome. I see that all the time. Mm-hmm. Yeah, it's imposter.
It can break out in a whole organization. We've been in stages like this where we subconsciously are optimizing and doing things that in theory increase your potential, but you're not actually shipping anything extra. So it's like, oh, we could do this cool thing. You know, like buying a new machine is an example of that. Mm-hmm. It's quite easy to buy a new machine. It's just a transaction. But to actually bring it to market involves a lot of scary steps of actually learning enough, becoming confident in it, and sticking it on someone's face and seeing what happens. You know, all of that is the scary stuff, whereas the purchase is actually not that scary. Mm-hmm. But there are people, I think, because we're afraid of the unknown, we do stuff that we are by default already able to do. And if you put that in a whole business context, it just means that you're never actually increasing the value of your business until you do the scary stuff. So it has to be scary in order to be growth.
Right. The scary stuff are signals that this is a stop point. This is a stop sign. Mm-hmm. And it's just for you to look around, look left and right, and determine if it's safe to take your vehicle ahead. And you have to take the action is what is the scary part for people. It can float around in your head as many times as you want, but until you action it, you really don't feel better.
Mm-hmm. So in your journey from going from 0 to 23 staff, what do you think's, and everything you've done in that whole context, what do you think's been the scariest part so far?
Hiring is one of the scariest things, and a lot of people ask me about that, and they ask me about that at Inner Circle. They're like, we think we need to hire, but it's so scary, and I think that's really scary. Because we have this interpretation that giving some of my money, that my profit that I made to this person, is taking away from my profit at the end of the year. Mm-hmm. But they have a formula of exponential ability to bring those sales back around and make you more money. And it's that barrier. That's a barrier right there. But it is scary. And then there's roles that don't translate into sales. There's behind the scenes work. Those are also very scary hires. So I would say hiring is probably one of the scariest, but at the same time, I've learned now that it's really important at the right moments. Those hires are what can propel the business forward.
Who was your first hire?
Our receptionist. Yeah.
That's what I did as well.
Yeah.
Receptionist. You know who Felix hired first? Another clinician to replace himself. That was my
second one.
Yeah. So we got a clinician too, but I remember thinking when I spoke to Felix, like he although he still does clinical work, it was that's really what the game of business is about. It's about replacing yourself as soon as possible. I'm terrible at that. I just create more work for myself.
Same. I don't know. I mean, I want to be out of it at some point. I think you do need to when the passion fizzles out, but I'm nowhere near that. I'm still ready. I have a fire and a burn, and there's moments where it feels like, okay, I have to find somebody to replace myself. But at the same time, it's where all of the inspiration comes from. I still see patients, and I get so much inspiration from them. That's part of what fills those 3 values that I have, like that warmth and connecting with people and learning their stories, and like it's therapy for me. So if I ever gave that up, I think I might as well, in my opinion, just sell the business. I need to see people to be inspired to keep perpetuating passion into the business. That's interesting. So knowing where your inspiration comes from is also really important. And I feel I get a lot from podcasting as well, but a conversation with a patient is also endlessly fascinating. I never get bored of it. I remember in the early days, before I'd realized how psychosocial aesthetics is, thinking I'm going to get bored with this because it's just injecting. There's only so much anatomy and transformations you can do, and it's just going to become repetitive. But it never did, because everyone is actually so unique and their story's different, and you have that connection. So you're right, it's a source of inspiration. And something else I think will help people is to know where your source of inspiration comes from. And for me, it's that transformation. And the deeper and the more valuable the transformation, the better. I'm also very inspired by my staff. We hire for personality over skill, because you can teach skill, and I think we have a pretty good method for determining personality, but we hire based on actual differences. So if somebody's better at something, or if you feel like they have strengths, that was how I started hiring. There's a little intimidating factor that this person actually might be better at certain things than me. That's a signal. I actually need them in my business, because they're going to fill a different niche. They're going to actually fulfill a part of the business that I am not super interested in or don't do as well with. But my staff are Can you give an example of that? Incredibly inspiring. Yeah, our nurse manager, Mia, she had such a fire in her when I first met her. She was actually a student of mine. I used to do instructing teaching for a big company. And she was in my rotation, and she refused to rotate out of my rotation when I was her instructor. And I just saw it. I'm like, they told everybody to rotate, and she stood there, and she's like, I'm learning from Chelsey. And I thought, that's really interesting. I wouldn't have probably done that. And then when she applied, she came forward and she said, do you remember me as a student? I applied. And then I realized that she was really good at managing people. And that's something I really don't love doing. And so I'm like, this person has different strengths, and she's also very mechanically inclined. She's really good with honestly building furniture. She's helped me build furniture. So these other skills is more of a complement to mine, to my skills, and that's actually made us a really rounded organization. And then I knew there was a level where we hired our COO. I knew I had limitations. You cannot do everything, or you're stunted in your growth. You do need some people to maybe don't replace you and everything that you do, but specific things that you are failing to do. And so her coming in, she's really good at marketing and really good at managing people, which is something that I didn't love as well. And so she came in and the game changed after that. I think each one of our hires has changed our business in some way. They were really good at handpicking. And that was one of the conversations that you and I had. I still to this day have 100% retention in all of our medical staff. I know we've only been around for 5 years, but that to me is huge. We've somehow managed to continue to inspire these people, and they continue to inspire us. I think it's that cyclical thing. They're so valuable. All of them. I could probably talk about each of them in some capacity that are inspiring.
Yeah. So I think clinical staff are the hardest, and the reason being because they're the only level where they're all kind of similarly doing similar things. Because you don't have 5 COOs, in which case you'd have some sort of vying for. Humans are naturally status oriented. I don't believe anyone is separate from that. We have different rules of what their status is, but it's quite hard to have a completely secure team of people who are all on the same level. In fact, I'd say it's impossible. So you have this, people want to grow, and some people get threatened by that, and people have different personalities and different goals. And for me, it was great for, I would say probably that we had 5 years similar, not to jinx anything for you, but and it was lovely, and I felt like I had this team of friends, and we all shared information, and they'd come into people's rooms just to share stuff and learn from each other, and we go to conferences together, and it was really blissful. And then I gradually, as the team grew, I basically slowly lost that, and it became basically I would say very unpleasant. I remember sitting outside in my car just dreading going in. Just felt like my body weighed a ton, and I didn't want to leave, and I'd just sit and think of something else to do, and eventually drag myself off to go and face this team. And there weren't bad people, like collectively there were people with their issues, but what I realized is I hadn't firstly I was good at creating leadership for a type of person, but not for everyone. So if you're idealistic and you want to make a difference and talk about how great your patient's transformation is, we'll probably get on really well. But if you're much more ambitious and just want to have your own thing, so I had people like that, and then there were other people who just wanted negative attention, in my opinion, rather than nothing at all, and they were competitive with each other. That started to pull things apart, and at that stage I was not good enough at recognizing it. So then. Have you ever had to fire anyone?
Well, we have as an organization. I have in my past lives, but I've never had to in my personal business because we have staff that take care of that.
I think it's a crucial skill, and a lot of clinicians battle with it because we're healers. Like, we meet someone who's unhappy, we want to make them happy by talking them around. And I used to have all my clinicians in therapy. We talk about all sorts of, great stuff which I like talking about. But at the same time, there's a point where your real patient is the organization with the mission. So I'd say that to anyone listening who's hiring staff, like, you've got to remember as the CEO, your patient is the organization. That's the person you've got to make optimize the thing, and the people are meant to all be serving this. Yes, you also need to love your staff, and they are the people who bring the value, so they're super important. But not everyone will fit in with the mission, and every now and then you have to recognize that and allow people to go and grow somewhere else. Would be a nice way of putting it.
Yeah, I think that I talk about that a lot. So we do have this belief that you hire really slow, but you fire fast, because there is a toxicity that happens when people don't match. When they don't match the environment, it's a corporate culture, essentially. That was another scary moment, though, moving from this, Felix calls it family style, to the scale style, and there was a lot of shifting and changing that needed to happen, and corporations don't move well through change. They hire big companies to move them through organizational change, people that are experts, talking about really big companies, because it's not easy. And I was worried that when we made this big shift change, because I was now removed. So at one point, all my staff had my number and they had access to me. And now that's obviously not the case. That's not sustainable. But shifting from that family style to a more corporate culture was scary, and I was afraid that we would lose staff. But we did it in a way that we didn't lose anybody. They understood the change. But you can find people in your organization that feel like toxic, and they either have to shape up or they have to ship out. It's really difficult to get somebody to sour to move on. And you said the competitive thing, it's like hard to manage people because it's often competitive. And we find that with the right competition, though, the right additions to this company, it can actually light a fire under them to actually just be better at their own job. But there's a way to manipulate that scenario to make it move in that direction. That's a whole other podcast. Organizational change is something else that I'm really interested in and I read a lot about.
So yeah, that idea of, because I like competition. There's the definition of competition comes from conspiring together. So it's actually not a zero-sum game. It's that we're better together. And I think it's one of the things that a good leader does more often, is that you get the team to feel all part of one thing, even though you've got different strengths and you're not all getting exactly the same, but you're all pulling in that direction. You know, it's the quote from the guy sweeping the hangar at NASA who says, what's the purpose of your job? And he says, I'm taking these men to the moon.
Yeah.
You know, that if you can create that connection. But the thing that is missing is that some people just do not see that connection. They're not there for that. They're on a different mission.
That's right.
And I think that's why it's actually a good thing to let people go, because if they are not fitting in with your mission, it's because they're on a different mission. And they will. And I see the people who've left me and they're all doing well in different things. And I wish I'd set them free sooner.
Yeah.
Because,
it's hard though, but you're right. It is a skill. And you have to go from this warm person, like I said, I want to be seen as, to this person that's like, you know, the devil. They just let me go, and because of X, Y, Z, and it's tough. But
but you seem to, you know yourself not to be a manager, and that helps, because you have to figure that out, because usually you start out being a manager because there's no one else. So I remember realizing that, like the same as you, God, I cannot manage people. I like leading people. I like coaching people, but managing is a whole different thing. So I wish I was better at it, but I just hate it and I'm not good at it. So good to know that. But you've obviously hired someone who can do that for you. And I think this is also a useful idea. I liked what you said about hiring people for differences in personality, because there's a great book, I think I told you about it last time we saw you, called Rocket Fuel. Rocket Fuel talks about the key people in a business that you need to scale. And I didn't realize, but I've landed with Lee, my business partner, and Miranda and me. We are basically a really good team, but we didn't know what roles we were supposed to be in. So we didn't even know. It's very strange. We had 4 business partners at once, and we didn't really have a CEO. We just had like these 4 people who were like all collectively making decisions. And it was such a bad way to do it, because we thought of it kind of, we're all to get together in this, but actually it's really helpful to know who's the ideas person, who's got the vision for the future, and you just go and do that. And that's clearly what you are. You're the visionary. You have a vision for the future, and you're pulling and you're trying to describe that vision to other people. And I think a lot of our listeners will fit more into the visionary type of mindset because they start out on their own. But you need the backup of what's called in this book an integrator. That's the person who actually pulls the tiny pieces together and makes the mechanism work. And it's a very hard job, and they're very hard people to find. It sounds like you found a good integrator. And then the other person is someone who's into sales and marketing. So the sales element is, those people tend to be quite emotional, extrovert. They're not always extrovert, but they like creating emotion in people. So I'm introverted, and I like to bounce off emotion from people, but I actually don't like to be the one to, like, you know, boo. Yeah. So I happen to have married Miranda, who's exactly that. She walks into a room and she creates emotion in people. And she does it. It's fun for her. It's her dream. Like, I just go and, you know, make people feel differently. So it's useful to understand those different dynamics, and then you can figure out like how to structure your business and what the missing piece is. Because when you have all of them, it gets easier than when you're trying to be all these things or you don't know who anyone is. So it sounds like you've been doing that. I'll share one other thing, bouncing off your idea of hiring different personality types. Is have you ever actively hired someone who you felt like, not that you wouldn't get on with, but you wouldn't choose them as a best friend, but you know they're going to be good in the business? Do you do that kind of hiring?
No, I actually do think that I hire people because I think I will get along with them. But in addition to that, they've got some other skill set strength that I maybe don't have. And the reason for that is it's that corporate culture that if I feel like we've got a team and I have to keep them healthy and sort of, I don't need to necessarily keep them happy, but we've created something. And if I bring in a personality that's a bit too different, it could actually ruin or tarnish everything. It also could make it better. There's that as well. So we do look for people who we think will fit well personality-wise, maybe not skill-wise, but personality-wise. So not that opposite, no. And we do have specific questions to tease those out. I kind of want to say what those are, and we do have different interview types for our clinicians, as obviously our administrative and back-end staff. But I find that those questions are really helpful in teasing out what kind of personality that they have and if they'll fit into our corporate culture. So I can't say I've hired deliberately somebody so different, however, freelancers maybe, but not people who will work in the business continuously.
So I made a shift with that because I realized I hired a bunch of people who were super agreeable at one point. So this is a great thing to do. I talked about it in a circle, is do your personality test and see where you fit on the spectrum. I'm on like the 98th percentile for agreeableness. So I do not fall out with people. I do online actually, but not in real life. So in real life, like my neighbor crashed through my gate the other day. I made him feel great about the whole thing. I'm not going to make him feel bad about it. I don't want to fall out with my neighbors, and I will never fall out with my neighbors. Unless they're psychos, which has never happened. So it's that kind of, it's a skill, it's a nice thing, it's being nice, but it's also got a weakness to it, which is agreeable people, they don't tend to bring uncomfortable truths until they've got some experience. Now I've learned this now. I will say awkward things to people when the time is right, but I never used to, because I was afraid of that. Creating a negative emotion in someone was one of my primary ways of navigating, make sure it's comfortable. And then you don't get a message across. And I had a coach who told me this. He was like, you need to tell this doctor you're going to fire them, otherwise they will keep going. And you need to say it in black and white terms because they don't know. And I was like, I thought they did know. And it's like, no, you've never said it.
You cannot assume.
Yeah. And it's because I've done this trying to make it really comfortable. But then I also hired loads of people like that who you would all like. But obviously people, they still have situations that they're unhappy with. And what that means is they say it behind closed doors. They say it in different experiences. And we had a lot of stuff going on that was never said to me. And I felt like we got on well with everyone, but they were not telling me stuff. So now we have in this business, one of our values is radical candor. So you say uncomfortable things, knowing that they're uncomfortable, but because you believe they're to be true, even if they turn out not to be true, you've got to say what you think. And we have a laugh around it, and it works quite well. But I realized the value of hiring people who are disagreeable, people who will say uncomfortable things and not care, are actually super valuable because they bring the truth. You probably don't need this because you strike me as really straightforward, and you're not the kind of person who will like say something you don't believe to be true. So you probably don't need to hire more disagreeable people.
Now that you explained all of that, I've definitely hired people who are not agreeable. And has been a game changer for us. But I wasn't thinking agreeable or not agreeable at the beginning, but those non-agreeable people are a little bit more behind the scenes. Actually, one of our largest roles isn't more, I wouldn't say non-agreeable, but brings the truth. And she does a lot of our more difficult things. So yeah, I've definitely hired people who are non-agreeable. And I love this aspect, learned it later, but it brings out a part of me that makes me better as a person and as a leader. But our front-facing people, our clinicians that see people, are a little bit more agreeable, but we teach them how to sometimes be not agreeable.
Yeah, that makes sense.
Yeah, because that warmth, right? They need to come in the door and feel like I'm safe with this person. And I wouldn't say that this person that's not agreeable is not warm. Like, she's amazing, but it brings out something in me, and it actually challenges me in a lot of ways, because I have to face that a decision I might be making is not the right decision, and sometimes I'll change my mind on that. Most often, like, I'm the CEO. At the end of the day, my stamp of approval is the be all end all, but it doesn't mean it's always the right decision. And so that's actually emotional intelligence, and I think you need to have emotional intelligence in a leader, and that is knowing when you're not the right person in the room. It's being able to read the room and know that you're not the most important person, and that there's other valuable things out there, ways of thinking about things. So that has challenged me and made me a better leader, actually, having non-agreeable people in my team. So I'll second that and say that I think that that's true. I have, but I didn't necessarily hire them for that. I hired them because I knew that they could handle these certain aspects of the job. However, they can handle it because they're not necessarily agreeable. So yeah, I'm with you on that one.
Yeah. I find it, and once I figured out the problem, I started to just pull people in, and almost the worse the thing they said, the more I wanted them nearby.
Yeah.
Because I realized how I'd lost, how I wasn't attached to, I wasn't getting the information. So, because, you know, and people would make excuses for you, and but they weren't telling me what I needed to know. And then I hired someone who ran the clinic for a few years. Sounds a bit like the person that you've got, who was just so black and white, straightforward, and would say in front of everyone in the meeting, like, oh, you know, Tim's wrong on that thing. And I was smiling. I was like, oh, great, someone's telling me, because everyone else had been just nodding and smiling and not actually saying it. So I really value those people.
Yeah.
The fewer filters, the better. The more uncomfortable, the better. I've actually trained myself to revel in uncomfortable conversations for that reason, because I know they're the true conversation.
That is hard.
Yeah.
But you get progress with that. With those unagreeable conversations or things that feel weird, there's actually progress on the other end of that. So you cannot be stagnant and do things the same way all the time and have nobody disagree with you. I think they want to agree with you because you are their leader and you pay their salary. But you're right. It creates a dynamic that allows things to progress and allows you to grow. And other people in the room to grow. Even if it's uncomfortable for them, they do grow from it. Yeah. They learn.
Well, growth is inherently uncomfortable. I don't think you can grow a business and for it to be just happy days every single day. It's absolutely impossible. It's uncomfortable. You might fail. You're not enough for your current role because you have to sort it out. You know, Layla sometimes says this. And I'm like, yeah, you're not yet, because we're doing things we've never done before and you have to learn new stuff, and we're all at our limits, which is great. It's actually the right way to be. Hope you don't mind me throwing you in later. But to me, understanding that is a big part of it. Like, it's going to be uncomfortable and we're all going to do new stuff that's a bit scary, and that's the path. It's not easy. Otherwise it will already be done. So
there's a saying you just reminded me of. It's a Greek saying. I don't know how to say it, but essentially it's, and I guess this is probably going back a few conversations as well, but the person, so I guess the analogy, two people meet at a river, and the one person who is so afraid to cross the river and finally decides to make the leap, the person who, maybe this is the unagreeable person, or the person who's a little bit more crazy or sees that as a challenge, is already back across the river and back before the person who is too afraid to make the move goes forward. And I think that's the challenge of growth, is that we're not able to move out of our own fears, like we talked about earlier, and being agreeable is also fear-based, I think, as well. Being very, very agreeable means that you're too afraid to go outside of your comfort zone. Mm-hmm.
It's in particular, it's a fear of rejection of someone, and this is also something that you have to let go of. It's a part of growing up, I think, when you're little and everyone approves. But you have to be okay that percentage of people will be pissed off with however you decide to do things. And then make your decision based on the outcome, not the relationships. That's a discipline I think you can learn, though.
Yeah, I agree. It's a skill that you can grow, absolutely.
So with it, the other thing I'm kind of interested in, the thing that happened, so we got to, I think we had 38 staff at one point, and we were in 3 different buildings, and we kind of got a bit siloed off. So it was all one clinic, but we had, the way that we'd expanded was into these different compartments. We're in a different place now, and it's all much more cohesive. But how do you how are you making your current team feel connected with a big picture when you're in 3 different places?
We have a really strong first training. So everybody gets the exact same training. So these are our clinicians. We rely on them most. They're our most forward-facing, patient-facing people, as well as our administrative staff. We have processes and protocols, and that was the only way to grow into different locations. And I'll compare it to streamlining processes the same way the big corporations do. Starbucks is a great example because it's non-franchised, and so neither are we. I own all of our locations, and those processes, those standard operating procedures, ensuring that they're the same across the board, even little differences, we nip them in the bud, because they can go rogue. It's so easy for one location to start doing things differently. We have to streamline those processes, and that's part of the foundation. Is that our processes they're all digital and online as well, so anybody can access them. And we have those chats. We have constant meetings with. I don't, but our staff have meetings constantly to make sure that administration is all on the same page about including how patients come in the door. We have the same script. We offer the same collagen and lemon water as soon as they move in. We make sure that they go into a room rather than waiting in a waiting room. Those processes for administration, processes for behind the scenes, processes for our clinicians are streamlined across the board. It is a challenge. I am not going to say that it's been easy, but we have to stick very strictly to them because otherwise locations can go rogue, including how we merchandise. Like that one product standing next to the next product is actually the same in every single location on the shelves, to keep it that simple. Each clinician has their own approach to a patient and the way that they maybe not necessarily the way that we inject. We try to offer the exact same outcome for every. That's hard as well, for a patient walking into this location to walking into this location. And we offer the exact same services everywhere. We will pilot things at our headquarters as a service because that's where I am, and I make sure everything's running well and kosher before we move on. But it's streamlining has been the essence. And then we do bring people together a few times a year. For either training or Christmas parties or holiday parties or whatever, we do bring them together, and we use those moments to reconnect with everybody. I do not travel to all the locations the same amount. One of our locations is in our hometown, so I do go there once a month. That is not sustainable. So it's just become part of I call it my hometown, and our clinic there fills my cup. So that is one thing that's different, is that I'm in one location constantly, and then another one once a month, just 2 days I'm there, and then the other one I'm not active there. But everything else is streamlined, and we relay that to every single staff, that this is important because without streamlining, it's not scalable and it's not sustainable. And I'm sure we say that 10 times a day comes out of our mouth. So it's about teaching them that that's important, and having the processes to back it up. Mm-hmm. So that's how we were able to do it, but we fumbled along the way until we've gotten to this point. That's probably one of the most important things. Yeah. And our marketing's all done from headquarters, and so that keeps
This is also
seamless.
huge. You need a great manager to do that. So it's because it's a constant drive towards keeping things the same. I found that the biggest challenge, which you've already touched on, is actually the clinical aspect, because any clinician who is a professional needs to be able to use their judgment and to have their own flavor to a degree. And even if you don't like that, like, you can't really stop people having their own flavor, so to speak. Mm-hmm. But it's frustrating. I found this one of the harder things because I have a consultation process which I could evidence is a better consultation process than any of the clinicians, and I would work to try and convey that to them. And they might do it once or twice, and then they go back to their own default. And I found that like really hard because it was right in the clinical space of like, you need to do my clinical way of doing things, and it work. And patients are happier, and you'll also do better average spends without trying, because it's a process that digs to the deeper value that patients are really after. But I found it very hard to do with certain clinicians. Others were like, I can't believe I'm getting this amazing training, and then others still were like, I'm going to do my own thing. Mm-hmm. So how have you broached that kind of interface between letting them have their own thing, their own way of doing things, while also maintaining a standard?
So it's multidimensional. One is that we have, there is no room to change safety. So we have rules on safety, and that's across the board. That's non-negotiable. So as long as you follow these specific things, these are ways that we now know is proven in science that can reduce the adverse events that we see in the world. Which, by the way, I need to knock on wood for this. We still have not had one adverse event in all of our clinics. So I think that works. We pay attention to those standards. It's non-negotiable. We also have so this was one of those moments where I said, this is what I want, until it wasn't what I wanted. And I wanted to have my own academy to teach other clinicians and, make money teaching others. And then I realized that I needed to focus on our own staff to make sure that we're all doing it properly. And so instead of looking to the outside world and having an educational system that people can buy into, we have the Cosmetic Clinic Academy, which is only for our staff. So they actually go through the training process of learning how we do things, and it's still being worked. So that was big for us to determine our academy is actually for our clinicians to know that this is how we can do things very standardized. There is always that aspect of you call it a flavor, that people will do different things different ways. But we do believe that because we also have a rule of natural approach, and our slogan, our tagline is your beauty, our science. So we do not offer nothing without scientific backbone. So if a clinician wants to come forward and do things a different way, if there isn't scientific background and they cannot prove it to us, it doesn't happen. So those are, again, standard operating procedures and rules of the business that keeps everybody fairly in line, even though they might have slightly different ways of doing things. As long as they respect your beauty, our science, they respect our standardized safety protocols, then there might be some element to creativity after that. So I had to focus. We had to focus on making sure that all of our staff could do things in a similar way. And like I said, we're still reworking it. But keeping the academy within the closed doors has been one thing that has kept us sort of fairly streamlined.
Mm-hmm. Have you ever had this experience where, have you ever trained a member of staff like almost from scratch, or have they already trained?
Most of our staff.
Most of them, yeah.
Yeah.
So
That's
I found
part
that
of our
was,
recipe.
Yeah, I found, because I've done a mix, and I found those were the good days actually, was like basically everyone was doing it my way. They all were connected with it, and then obviously they start to go to conferences, and then I've noticed a lot of people then would come back with feeling like everything they'd been taught was a lie. Like it would be, it's things
I
like
know, and it happens all the time.
Yeah. So how do you deal with those kind of encroachments from other ways of doing things, different schools of thought, when they've gone to a conference and now they want to do things differently?
So we were kind of battling that recently, but we've been calling it the Cosmetic Clinic lens. So the Cosmetic Clinic is our company. And again, is it backed by science? Is this just somebody doing something anecdotally? So my background is research and science. So I kind of do that by default. If it doesn't have significant difference or a value that we can prove in science, then it doesn't have a place. So we ask people, they might go away to conferences or they might go to peer-to-peer events or things like that, but we ask them to come back. What's the knowledge? What did you learn? And then let's work through, does it fit through the Cosmetic Clinic lens? Because maybe they are bringing something back that is of value, but it also might be, we call it cowboy stuff, cowboy shit if I can. And it happens all the time. So they go away and then they come back and they're like, well, this isn't how we're doing it. And we remind them there's a reason why we do it this way. And until something is proven, our patients expect this scientific background, this scientific evidence from us. So we can't stray from that. And it's happened. And it's a coachable moment as well. So they might come back and they say, this trainer was teaching this. I told them that we did it this way. And they looked at me sideways and said, well, why are you doing it that way? And so we have to re-explain to them, remember why we do it this way and how we know we're safe to do it that way, because periosteal injections are, we're not necessarily working in the line of arteries, so we remind them of that. And then it becomes natural for them to start thinking through the Cosmetic Clinic lens. Mm-hmm. We've struggled with that as well because we do a lot of training. It's one of the pillars of our business is that we offer a lot of education and training, and we can't complete all of it. So we work with companies, dermal filler companies, that we require that if you want us to use your product, we require specific training so many times a year from your company to come in and teach you some of our new injectors or our injectors that might be looking for new techniques. And it started to get messy because they were pulling all in these trainers that maybe hadn't had a lot of experience and they were going rogue. And so we thought, okay, this is an issue. This is sort of a problem. We have to figure out how to do that. So we created what we call the Cosmetic Clinic lens, and it's pulling it back and saying, think about this critically from our perspective. Does it fit? If it doesn't, please discard it and don't use it. And if it fits, then great, bring it to the table. That's been impactful, but we're still, I'm not gonna lie, we're still working through that because there's so many ways of looking at things.
Yeah, it sounds. I love the process and almost the branding you've got for it, because that's an idea people can refer to in their mind, almost while their old idea is being undermined by some new trainer. Because people can be super judgmental in these clinics as well. It's kind of an egotistical thing that I purposely try to get rid of in myself, which is try and find what is the good aspect of this technique and how it compares with your existing technique. And what are the first principles involved, and how does it fit with your existing mental model? Because so many clinicians, I realize, were willing to give up everything just to move to this new way of doing things that was simply because they had a very, very, what would be the word, confident trainer who'd made them feel bad about the other way. So you have to, that was a less articulated way of saying there's a way of assessing this in context, which is what the Cosmetic Clinic lens is trying to do. So I like that idea.
We're really serious about it, and to be honest, I'm the one that goes and seeks most of these things. I always say I travel around the world to learn something new. What's the newest laser technology? What are the newest ways of injecting? And so I don't go to all of the conferences anymore, but I really do. For us, it has to come from the top. We are also leaders with other businesses, so we know that people are looking at us, and if we step out of line, we'll get called on it, and it will make us unauthentic. So other injectors and other businesses, I know that they look at us and say, well, if the Cosmetic Clinic does it that way, we're going to do it that way. So we have to maintain that protocol, that we don't offer things unless we know that it's scientifically proven and we can push it forward. And I have lots of examples. We had somebody go to a training and come back and say, well, they didn't do it this way because it caused hyperpigmentation in a specific population of people. And we said, did you ask why? Did you ask, is this anecdotal, or is this scientifically, is there evidence behind it? And there was no evidence. We went to the company and they're like, we haven't heard of no papers or anything written on this. Nobody knew anything. We went to a pharmacist who was also doing some training, and they're like, we've never heard of this. And I said, see, this is the importance of asking where this knowledge comes from. And I'm working with that with my master's right now, as I'm actually doing a course that actually goes to the nitty gritty, like epistemology and ontology. How do we get to the knowledge that we have? There has to be a system for the knowledge, otherwise we're all going rogue, and so we're very serious about that. So
yeah, that's interesting. There is a lot of stuff that is purely stories. I'm always curious, like how do these things break out? And I think a lot of it comes down to the drug companies who are trying to differentiate themselves in different techniques that only their product are suitable for. So they find something that their product's good for. The story is that they will then, that becomes the norm within those cultures. Like I've realized there's a big divide between the Allergan and Teoxane influenced trainers. Yes. And they both say things to basically counteract the other one's way of doing things. And I don't think either one of them are particularly well evidenced.
Exactly. It leaves everybody confused. So instead of looking at these companies for proof, go back to the drawing board and go look at the literature, look at the white papers, and determine if that's something you can do. And then at the end of the day, I said, I'm very serious about medical mandates and safety. And if you're not going to do it in the traditional medical world, you're not going to do it in our clinic. So could you just imagine going out to these conferences and finding all these different ways of doing things as a general practitioner or as a surgeon, not having white papers behind it? You go to do it, you end up in a lawsuit, and you lose your license because you've just heard anecdotally that they do this differently. Training is important, and it comes backed by science. And mistakes, but it's just not, it doesn't happen in the traditional world, or it shouldn't. So if it's not translatable from the traditional medical world, how does it have a place with what we do? And I think this is the biggest disconnect between the medical and aesthetic world, is that they think we're in this category, this different category where we do things differently. And I totally disagree. I think we have to take everything we've learned from our fundamentals and bring it with us and grow with it. But we can't, it's the same thing. And I think that's how independent nurse injectors get lost. And nothing burns me more than seeing a nurse injector totally dilute our field by, I keep saying this, going rogue, but by not following the same protocols and procedures that we would in an institution. And that, number one, is sometimes you see nurses being incredibly sexy online, trying to be sexy, and they're maybe selling whatever their business is based on having provocative clothing, or I've seen ads where it's just women, nurse injectors, shaking themselves in the mirror to get attention for their business. Where in the medical world would you ever see that? What medical professional would you, I'm getting heated now, sorry, but where would you ever see that and want to go see that clinician for your whatever, your pap test or anything like that? I think it's so disrespectful and of the distance that we've come from early years of medicine to how far we've had to fight and come today, that I think we can easily dilute our medical sort of rigor and through these actions. And so we have to go back to our fundamentals. Why do we do what we do? Everything we do is evidence-based. So why would we stray from that in what we do? It's just diluting us as clinicians and medical professionals, healthcare professionals. So that really burns me when I see that a lot. It feel like it can totally take away from our licensing and how far we've come. And our predecessors have worked so hard to allow us to be what we are today, and forgetting our fundamentals can quickly tarnish how far we've come. And so that's another reason why I don't say medical spa, because I'm a medical clinic. We don't do anything spa-like whatsoever, and we don't do any nails. We don't do anything dirty that is not sterile. And so I refuse to allow anybody to, even our marketing teams, they want to put medical spa, and I'm like, do not put that. We're not a medical spa. So I'm very, very serious about that, and it translates into all of our protocols and procedures.
Interesting.
There's not a lot of room for that in my business.
There's a debate we sometimes have in the UK about whether we call our patients or clients. You sound like you call them patients.
I do call them patients,
yeah.
100%.
And I started out calling them clients because the first person who taught me said we don't have clients because they're not sick. And then I realized, like, I have patients because I'm responsible for their health. Like,
high five.
so,
yeah.
and it doesn't matter if they're sick or not. I still make decisions in the context of their overall health. And that's the difference between a clinician and a technician, is that you're making health-based decisions. And we have, obviously, in the UK, this problem with there is no regulation, so anyone can do it. And they will argue that they can learn the anatomy and they can learn the injection techniques and all that stuff, but that's not really the heart of it. Is about, are you making commercial decisions or medical decisions?
Agreed.
Are you responsible for health, or are you responsible as a vending machine who just provides treatment? So I think that's a philosophy I 100% agree with, that you're
And
promoting.
I actually made a post probably maybe a year ago on this, and I tried to differentiate between customers, clients, and patients. And customers is a transaction, right? You go to a retail operation and you're a customer, you're a number to them. You just swipe your card and you're a customer. Clients, there's a bit of a more intimate relationship with, and there was this weird thing like 15, 20 years ago where even in nursing, they tried to make us, they still are really forcing, even in my master's, they're still saying clients, and I refuse. I said it's patients, because the difference between a client and a patient is a medical responsibility. And it's another reason why we wear a white coat. It's not because we're trying to look like we are more valuable than any other member of our society. It's that when our patients look to us, they must feel safe. And there is a dress, there's a uniform, and there's a mode of action. There's a way that you display yourself that needs to warrant that trust. And they come and they pay you money, and they put wrinkles are still vulnerable. People are very vulnerable with you. And if you look like somebody that can't respect that vulnerability, then you're going to get a different type of patient. It's going to become more of a cosmetic rather than medical sort of entity. So, yeah.
So
we have patience.
Let's finish off then on marketing. So we've talked a lot about like the structure, the leadership, management. These are incredibly valuable ideas, but you still have to bring patients in. How are you bringing patients in and book with you in the first place? Because that's, for many clinicians, is the hardest bit.
Mm-hmm. It's the same way that we attract people who want to work with us. We're very diligent on streamlining what we put out there. Like I said, our slogan is really important to us, your beauty, our science. And then there's a type of people that get connected to that. So we don't stray from it. And patients out there look at us and they are connected to the fact that we have those standards. So we market through, we did a whole marketing, plan, and we did our mode and tone and our slogan and all that stuff. And that's what we put out there. So we also have our own staff. They do their own social media, but they follow all of the same rules. that the messaging. So our messaging is really important, and that brings people in, people who already match our description. They find us. We don't tend to get a lot of patients that don't care about standards and medical aspects and the fact that we're wearing a white coat. So that's become very strong for us, and we've seen the proof that when you market exactly authentically who you are and what you want in, even if it's very niched, they will find you. It takes like 7 to 10 times of somebody looking at you before they make the move into calling your clinic or what have you. So those 7 to 10 times need to be consistent, or it's probably going to be more like 20 times that they need to look at you to gain trust before they make the move. So we market with a system, and what we found is that people who want to work with us say the exact same things our patients say. So I know that our marketing is strong that way. Is that what you meant to ask?
Yep.
Yeah.
Are they mostly coming through Google searches, social media?
I would say all of the
mouth?
above. If you are in a service-based business, Google ads or Google search is really, really important. You have to focus on that, and then being there at the top. So you have to learn about what SEO is and work with that. But we also have 3 different clinics and 3 very different demographics and 3 very different locations. And so each one of those areas has a different type of marketing that works best. And to be honest, we had to try it. We had to trial to figure out what worked best. And in our largest location, bigger city, the Google ads work better. And referrals across all of them. Referrals are always the best way. And then in our smaller locations, one of them, we even have a billboard. Works really, really well. People see our faces and they want to come in, but it doesn't work as well in the other communities. We've done radio ads, and that worked really well in the smaller communities. And with social media ads, we do also in the smaller communities, but we rely a lot more on Google searches for our larger community. I'm not saying they're all going to be the same, but they do require a trial and error. And I have done a lot of trialing and erroring to determine which ones were best. And at the end of the day, it's actually something different for each location. So you have to learn about your demographic and where you're at to know where people are. You have to go to them. If they're online, go to them. I would even say that our communities, like one social media platform is better than the other. So in our smaller communities, people are still very Facebook based. And then in our larger communities, Instagram is more prevalent. So we have to focus our efforts on that. And so it's just a matter of learning. Mm-hmm.
Well, what I'm getting across quite strongly is that you're not selling products. You're selling like an idea, like the science. Your beauty, our science, is a central idea
100%.
that if you think about what you're offering people, it's not injections. Like you're offering the certainty of a science-backed method of achieving whatever their particular goals are. Mm-hmm. I think it's a really critical error that many people make, which is that they talk about the products the whole time, and actually people actually don't care about getting injections. They want safety and they want an outcome, and to go on and on about. The best example of this would be like something like Red Bull. Like imagine Red Bull was banned from talking about their ingredients and that there was caffeine in it. They wouldn't care at all because it's not about their ingredients. They're about the outcome and the brand, what it means. And that sounds like what you're doing as well.
100%. We are creating a community. That community has turned into an army. That army is now telling everybody else about what we're doing, and we can't stray from it. But we don't have a community of haters. We really don't get a lot of hate online. We are very serious about that community, and I do describe it. It is a community. They are attracted to us by something. They don't really know what it is, but then they realize I'm attracted to them because of their standards and their medical aspect. So I'm attracted to that. And they are different. We are different. I'm talking from their perspective. So these guys look very different from these guys because they're focusing on the medical aspect, and I'm safe with them. And their results are really good. But this other grouping, they're focusing on selling to me because this is a product. And I actually think this is a really good little soundbite for our Australian friends. And in Canada, we actually have pretty good regulations, pretty strong regulations that we're not selling pharmaceuticals at all. We don't use brand names. We stray away from that. I try to keep ourselves out of a legal battle at all costs. And so we don't talk about this dermal filler or dermal filler at all. We talk about this is the outcome and this is the relationship we're going to have along the way. So we have not yet to have those issues, but if you focus on your authenticity, showing who you are as a business, then you actually don't need to talk about the products. And I think this could help our Australian friends who are going through the TGA and wondering how the heck am I going to advertise if they don't even know what I'm offering? Because the offering is not Botox. The offering is not Dysport. The offering is, I'm going to take care of you and you're going to feel this way in my care, and this is going to be the outcome rather than this particular product. So it's more of like a feeling branding, a relationship branding, and it's doing really well for us because it's setting us apart from all the other people who are focusing on those other things. And Aussies out there, that's what you need to be doing for your advertising, 100%. It's a massive loophole, but it's actually not a loophole. It's a great strategy.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I love that. It's a discipline to think this way, because by default we always think about the problem from our position, whereas the problem for your patients is not, I don't know where the filler or the Botox is. Like, I feel uncomfortable on my Zoom call, or I want to feel better. Mm-hmm. I want to build a relationship or something. So but I'm scared. So I need somewhere safe I can go. So your messaging is way more important than the products that you use. And as soon as you realize that, you actually build something better. And what I love about what you've been saying is you've clearly got this discipline around some certain core ideas that you come back to time and time again, almost relentlessly, and all of them are based on things that patients really need from you. They need consistency, they need safety, they need a sense of their interests being central to it all, and you're just relentlessly going around the circle doing those things, and patients pick it up, and of course they then keep coming.
And I think people probably think, well, how would we get them to learn about that aspect of it? Well, that's where the consultation comes in. That's where you can really show your scientific knowledge and talk about products and why one molecule of neurotoxin might be different than another one. You get that in the consultation, but talking about that doesn't get them in. And marketing, all that is getting into the brain of the consumer and their perspective. You have to let go of how you see things and see things through their eyes. So you get them in based on that relationship and that comfort. And then once they're in closed doors, you're not marketing anymore. You're offering them what you have, and they get to decide what does this person have and how much of it do I want. And that's also that difference between patient and customer or client. So I don't think there's anything wrong with having patients when typically we think of patients as sick. So what if, instead of thinking that we don't want to call our healthy patients because they're not sick, what if we looked at them and said, maybe we're not looking at sick people as like they're a problem. Everybody's a patient. It doesn't have to be always a negative thing. It's actually just the fact that you're in care, whether you're sick or healthy. So it's just the way that you relay the information. And I mean, it's been working really well for us.
Well, I think you've conveyed a tremendous amount of value there. If I was a nurse starting out today and I got to listen to this podcast, I would have so much of a clearer idea about what to do. And what I love about it is it's so values driven. It's the expression of things that are important to you. And it's so connected with the outcome for patients that it's a fabulous way to build a business. And it's so much better than the kind of shortcuts and the more narcissistic way that people can attempt to try out things, because and it's a formula. I can see this formula. You can tweak the values and do things slightly differently, but there's a great formula that's all centered around something valuable for patients. So thank you so much for sharing it with us.
My pleasure. Thank you so much.
Okay.